The only way to engage with trades is to actually do it, to have real conversations and meals. I have some pretty good relationships with people who are working in trades, and I can consider those people my friends. As human beings, like I have a friend who's a owner of a business, and I have a friend who is a iron worker, and I consider them both equal friends as the hierarchy of friends go in my world. But I've been trying to think about that. And this is how you truly engage. Bring these people over to your house like they're your friends, because they truly are. Or go to their house. And even though they might be culturally different with their family, if you're truly friends, even if you don't speak the same language, it doesn't matter at all. So I think that's really cool. We get the opportunity to do that. I'm trying to do that more often with the people we work with.
Yeah, man. We got to do better. I was at a Lean Coffee with Scow's group yesterday with Jen, with Keon Zandy and Buddy. You got to hang out with Buddy. He's awesome. And one of the things I put on the board was like, let's talk about deepened connections. I think it's an important point, and I've seen it. I saw it again, totally different group of people. Same thing. It was two big takeaways in the little 10 minutes that we talked about it. I was like, guys, do y'all ever notice when you walk a job and you go to interact with a trade worker, how they stare at the ground and kind of scatter? And everybody's like, oh, wow. Like, yeah, you're right. And I was like, that is because we have conditioned them to view that human interaction as punitive.
When the people come around with the clean vests and like you see all of us straighten up, go get off your ladders, go throw the ladders in the closet. But we train them. We train them to go and hide. And now I'm not a big shot or anybody, but I'm not typically on the project. So if I'm walking the job, I'm a new face. And my vest is pristine. My boots, so they're clean. I keep my stuff clean. So it's obvious that I'm not a working person. And it's obviously I'm not part of the normal project team. So immediately I get treated like, what's happening here? And I've done it. Like I've trained, I've given advice, I've shown pictures. Hey, as this guy shows up, go away, go to the roof.
Oh, yes. Calabosession number 5 has finally dropped. That is my buddy Thomas Lamay and I. And you're going to notice in this conversation, it's a little more free-flowing, a little more freestyle, baby. Thomas brought the game. The first 4 collabo sessions, yes, I said 4, so that means that there's some more for you to go in and enjoy and consume, especially over the holidays now. The conversations were kind of framed around some notes and some ideas, or some thinking rather, that Thomas put into play in preparation for you guys. From here forward, these next few collabo sessions are going to be a little looser, which is more my style. You may notice that I'm going to be talking just a little bit more. Before you get to the rest of the conversation, I want to ask you to give a shout out, fist bump, hugs, love, positive vibes, all of those things to our patrons. We're wrapping up 2022. And we've had some patrons that have been committed to us all year long, some of them longer than a year. They have contributed to the experience that you're having. So if you've enjoyed it, let us know. And if you haven't, let us know too. Patrons, love y'all very much. Hope to spend another year with y'all. And the intent is for us to continue providing some type of value, some awesome experience that you're proud to be a part of, and we appreciate you for that. And then we'll be calculating the amount of money that we're going to be contributing to the Skilled Trades Alliance, because that's part of the idea, right? 80% of whatever we get from the patrons, we're turning around and contributing that to Skilled Trades Alliance, because Skilled Trades Alliance got it going on, baby. You got to check them out. And we're going to make a little switch. Normally, we would have a L&M family member shout out at the end of the episode. And I'm not sure if anybody's actually listening all the way to the end. Who knows? And so I want to make sure that the L&M family members that are going out of their way to leave a comment or a review get recognized. And I want everybody to know that you leave a comment, you leave a review, we're going to be recognizing you, baby. So here we go. This shout out is for L&M family member, Mr. James Gable, host of the Uncommon Communicator podcast. Drop this comment for us. He says, Jesse, I've really enjoyed the collabo sessions on the Goal with Thomas Lamay. Keep them coming. I have encouraged several others to read the book. We all have a couple of Herbies in our lives. And the last collabo session, we start talking about Herbie. We talk about Herbie some more. So help people understand what that Herbie is. And more importantly, go out and help a Herbie. And before we go, one more thing. The Lean in Love Reflection Journal is out. The final edited version of it is available for you on the Amazon. And also, I got to give another shout out to another L&M family member, No BS Tribe member, Maria Martin and Krista Ackles. They both went out of their way to give us feedback in terms of what the journal, how the journal needed to be tweaked. Their feedback has been incorporated into the final available for purchase Lean in Love Reflection Journal. So go to the Amazon, get you a copy. It's a monthly journal. If you've already got one, leaving us a review, some stars, all of the above would be deeply appreciated. Okay, and here we go on to the rest of Collabo session number 5.
And now I'm probably the one they're showing the picture to. How do we change that? The only way that I can change that is to change the way I interact with people. And it's super hard because it takes a lot of time. And when your time is limited, as it is for me, I wish I could be everywhere at all places at all times. So how do I engage with people? Here's a cheat code for me. It's hard to come off genuine when you do this, especially if you're like the pristine boots and pristine vest and hard hat's impeccable. It's obviously a corporate guy here, but you go to a crew that's doing any kind of work and hopefully not stop them from doing their work. But if there's a break in the action, like, tell me about what you're doing. And I'm super curious about exactly how are you doing? What are you doing? And try to be super open and genuine about it. What do you think about that? Do you appreciate that as a tradesperson?
So that's the thing, right? Is tell me about what you're doing. Tell me what you're doing. The times that I've seen people do that, once they get through, like, is this a trick? Or are they trying to trap me? Because I mean, that's part of the problem, right? Is most of the fancy boots or even the general contractor that's on site, they rarely interact with them unless they're getting on their ass about something. And so then they got to figure, like, is this okay? This is safe. They are happy to tell you all the intricacies about what they're doing because nobody ever asked them. Nobody ever asked them, what are you doing? How do you do it? What is this? Like, and that's the thing. So like in that conversation, I was talking to the team. They're like, well, it's kind of hard. I'm like, it's not that hard. You just introduce yourself, ask them their name, ask them why they're in the trade, right? Learn their name. Why are you in the trade? How long have you been on this job site? How is this job site different than the last one? What do you do on the weekends? Do you hunt? Are you traveling? Are you suitcasing in? Talk to them like they're a human being. Like you would talk to anybody. You're standing in line getting coffee, standing in line at the airport. You strike up conversations all the time. Why can't we do that with the men and women out there in the field building our stuff?
You don't have to buy expensive barbecue.
Nope.
You don't have to have a raffle of swag. You don't have to post it on LinkedIn. Just be real. It's hard. I hope I kind of tricked you into that conversation because it links into chapter 20.
Ooh.
So our merry band of misfits, right? We got the gang at Unico in chapter 20 here. And they have to go out into the fab and interact with tradespeople. They have to do this. This is now, they no longer can do their planning or evaluations with computers and simulations and talking to high-priced consultants like Jonah. So Jonah does inspire them. He's teaching them that, hey, you got to distinguish between types of resources in the fab. That means for every unit that goes through that bottleneck, that's the pace of the work. And all of a sudden, you have to choose. And the choice, this is a difficult situation because when you start talking about bottlenecks and resources, you start talking about human beings. And human beings in a process, page 191, is any resource whose capacity is equal or less than the demand placed upon it. So, Jesse, if you need to run 80 feet of sanitary line, you got 8 hours.
Yeah.
Say, we got to cover this line up for us to start the foundation. You're the bottleneck and you need 80 feet. That's the demand that's been placed upon you and your crew. Also behind you is a crew of 40 carpenters, laborers, rebar, dump trucks, excavators. The sanitary line is 12 feet deep, so it's not exactly easy. Yeah. So any resource whose capacity is equal or less than the demand placed upon it, and a non-bottleneck is any resource whose capacity is greater than the demand placed upon it.
Yes.
So if they got capacity that's greater than the demand currently in this instance is 80 feet of sanitary line. The capacity is, hey, we can do a whole bunch of concrete, but we can't do it because Jesse's got the Grand Canal dug out. It wouldn't be safe to place a heavy excavator next to a 12-foot deep excavation. So we have ourselves a constraint, or at least a bottleneck. It's not a complete constraint because you do have some capacity.
And so the exact scenario, we'll use the same numbers and apply it to like a real life situation. So I know my estimated install rate. So my estimated install rate is 10 foot of cast iron per hour in that situation. In an 8-hour day, I can do 80 feet. That's good. So I'm at the limits of the threshold. So yes. I'm already a bottleneck.
So now, just for anyone listening who'd be like, what, 10 feet an hour? That seems crazy. But this is 12 feet down in a ditch in the south. And today it was 100 degrees. And you ain't moving fast. And so things need to be hoisted down into it.
Shoring got to be moved. So estimated conditions are 10 foot an hour. And this is fake, people. Don't freak out. So I'm already a bottleneck because I'm at the threshold. That does not account for any problems. So as soon as a hiccup happens, I will not meet the goal. I will not meet the target, period. Now, what I've done, it's funny because I lived it. It was happening to me. And then I went and did it to people until I kind of figured it out, is I've been on this job. I know it's estimated at 10 foot per hour. I know it can be done at 10 foot per hour, but the past 3 months, because of the conditions on site and all the stuff, we've been hitting about 7 foot per hour. And I'm still going to commit to the variation that lives. And so here's the thing, right? It's like, ideally, we're going to manage the variation out. But our history, like our real life, recent history tells us at peak, we're only able to do 7 foot an hour. But I'm going to plan to hit 10 foot an hour. And we do that over and over and over again. I mean, the bigger scenario is, projects, rough project, we're running up on schedule. We're already working overtime. We're working long days. We're going to start adding Saturdays, and we're going to start stacking trades. And I'm looking at my budget, my projections of manpower and dollars, and I'm like, going at the rate that we've been going at, I'm going to bust by 20%. So the financial forecast I'm going to make on the project is to bring it back to budget. That's your total denial. Like my history shows, given all the contributing factors, 1.2 is the ratio, my performance rate. Does that make sense? So the plan should be, we're going to be at least 20% over budget, and not surrender to it, but let's get real, because when I account for the plan, like really, we're 20% over, we've been 20% over. And if we go 20% over, this is the actual impact. All of a sudden, people are going to say, whoa, we can't do that. Okay. We have to make significant change to bring us back to 1, and even greater management and resources to keep us under 1. So when you have that bottleneck, and if you're clicking on all cylinders, I'm going to do 10 foot an hour, I'm going to hit that 80 foot in a day. That's not without extra effort. I need to have some mechanisms in place to absolutely address any variation, because if I don't, we ain't going to hit it.
That's right. So your capacity is less than the demand, and there's a cost to that. Then to increase your capacity means you have to increase your operating expense. You need more resources. Right? Blue straight up says this in the book. 80% of our products flow through the bottlenecks. Not only is there a cost and operational expense to your third-party company, there's a cost and operational expense of your work, of your capacity, because it's also holding up this huge crew of foundations. This is 1980s. It comes out to $2,188 an hour of their operating expense. So I think every hour that plant is down, they're just burning $2,200. But if you think about it in this instance, if Jesse's the sanitary gang is not installing at their full operating capacity, and they're not meeting, and they're a bottleneck. So now behind Jesse's sanitary gang, that's 40 people. But that's 4 times the operating expense, probably more than that, because the equipment and all the materials is super expensive. So that's $1 waiting on a dime. How do I know? Because I've said these words. But what we do typically is we just pressure Jesse instead of lightening the load, right? We got to go back to Herbie. What would I typically do? Here's what we would typically do. We would have you create some fancy contraption shoring system that you got to go get special ordered. That way we can set our excavator and our concrete pump right next to it so you can work safe. And so it's like, was that the right answer? The whole cost of the entire job is going up based upon our inability to relieve the bottleneck. Lightening some kind of load on Jesse's sanitary crew. So, hey, all of a sudden we just found a Herbie and maybe this situation got resolved, but that's like, hey, that operating expense didn't even increase because the work that we were going to pay Jesse's crew, we're just going to pay the earthworking company. Yeah. And if we did it on a time and materials basis, there's no materials, it's just earth. So then it's just time. And if they're super efficient, this is a fixed scenario, everybody. Don't need any armchair estimators. But the idea is lighten the load. We don't have to go straight to our scope of work and be like, no, you have to do this. And because this is what you do, think outside the box. Yeah. And find a bottleneck and figure out a situation to do that. So they go out into the factory and go looking for Herbie.
Yeah.
Looking for Herbie.
Yes. Not to make fun of them. Let's just go find Herbie so we can fix, so we can help.
Yeah. So Donovan, he's the operation manager. Page 163, he goes, why don't we go ahead with the easier things right away and see what kind of effects they have while we're developing the others? That's what he asks. He's ready to go. And they go, okay, well, we got to find Herbie. So they're like, well, it's got to be in a bottleneck, according to Jonah. So Jonah's like, anything that's in front of a bottleneck is be piling up inventory, right? Have you ever seen inventory start to pile up?
Oh, my God. Yes, too many times. Well, and confession, I've intentionally piled up inventory, but that's a different chapter. I want to just point that out. Like you said it, but just in case anybody missed it, let piles of inventory be an indicator of a problem. If you see inventory, stop, investigate, because there are hidden problems there.
Actually, it says it in the book. Don't you see? If we got a Herbie, it's going to have a huge pile of work in process sitting in front of it.
Yes.
He's like, Bob goes, we got huge piles of all over the place out there. But you got to find the biggest pile of inventory, and then that's your leading indicator of you got a Herbie. And then don't get mad at the Herbie. Think about lightening the load. Why do you think it's important to learn? You have to learn to see bottleneck. What do you think it's important?
Well, one, I'm going to give 2 points. One is, from my experience, right? Before I knew what to look for or could see, it was always there. So I was swimming in it, right? Like I was swimming in the problems. They were all around me. I was conditioned to that and just kind of dealt with it. And the way I dealt with it was pushing the people, but it wasn't the people. It was the system. The system was busted. And so that being able to see helped me say, oh, it's not the guys. It's the way we're doing things. It's the way I'm ordering stuff. It's the way I'm communicating. It's the way I'm planning. It's the way I'm orienting things. Like all of a sudden, I was able to shift the way I was operating to set the guys up for success and like make their day a little bit better. Now, the downside of learning, there's a second point. The downside of learning to see is once you learn to see, you can't unsee.
It's like somebody's butt crack.
Yeah, exactly. You saw it, and that image is imprinted in your head. And then, so now that I can see all the waste, my experience was at that time, I had like anxiety, like, oh my God, we're never going to be successful. Everything's going to be a failure. We're losing so much because I could see it everywhere. And the truth is, it's not different. It's always been there. all this nervous energy I have, I need to apply it to redesigning the system. Bottom line, let's evaluate it. Let's redesign it. Let's find the biggest pile and let's go do something about that one. Run some experiments and make things happen. Let's go find us a Herbie.
So when all processes completely fail, still don't do that. Just go help them. Right. So you have to learn, you have to teach people how to do this. And this is incredibly hard because teaching people takes capacity. You have to have the capacity to learn. So if you're completely buried in all of your day-to-day goings on, you have no capacity to learn. So you have to, number one, like, hey, I'm going to help you. And this is super important. So whatever you're doing, you would now have permission to turn that in 3 days instead of tomorrow. Right. Yeah. So if you're in a management position, give somebody an out a little bit, give them an inch. And now they have capacity and be like, now instead of doing that thing super tedious, let's go walk this. And I'm going to teach you what it means to me. And now all of a sudden it's like, oh, we got a constraint. Our plan was fit. We were doomed to begin with because we didn't plan this change, this added scope. And if you find those resources that are idle, that's your inventory. The step in front of that idle resource, that's a constraint. No matter what, are there lifts sitting around? Are there stacks of stuff? Are there things missing? But all of a sudden, like, it takes the kind of the BS out of it. And when you teach people that, it's like going to school. You learn this little secret cheat code, like go sift through the trash, look for what's in there and what's not in there. And somewhere in that pile of trash and the piles of inventory and what's idle resources is the problem. And once you find that problem, you've struck gold. Yes. Gold. Yes. Like a prospector. And then when you find that gold, you got to be happy about it because it's super valuable stuff. But you have to figure out which of the things are slowing all of the other things down. And once you find that, you found your Herbie. That's the theory of constraints, at least the fundamental piece of it. Just because it happened on the Empire State Building doesn't mean it's going to happen on your high rise, right? Or whatever.
Right.
You have to treat every bottleneck as a unique problem to solve. And when you go into it in that mindset and not go into it alone, it creates teams. It creates trust. There's respect because all of a sudden it's like, hey, Jesse, your little mini backhoe, like move this thing out of the way. We got you. We got you, bro. We're going to backfill this. They have these like robot. Have you seen these like the rover robot that like instead of the tamper drive? Oh, it's so cool. We got 3 of those, Jesse. Like, get out of the way. Just give us a signal when you pass your inspection. We'll just bury this and it'll be done in an hour. We just solved a problem. We've now alleviated the bottleneck. And then we're moving forward on our original path. They're like, it feels good. Yeah. It feels good. And nobody was bickering. Nobody got thrown off the job site. Like, we didn't have to go down that road. No. We just look for the slowest part of the operation, the backfilling process, because Jesse's, they got the line. They can run some pipe. But the backfilling piece, give that to the experts. But in essence, how you manage your resources and how you manage your bottlenecks and how you get trash out of the freaking way, it's like that's how you create flow in a construction job site, at least in my experience.
Yes.
That's chapter 20.
There's a couple of thoughts that triggered in my head. One, maybe it's one of the inventories that I forgot about until you were describing the situation. And so in that situation where we're behind and off schedule, right? We're consistently off schedule. There's a problem. The inventory that we get, the extra work that we get is we need a recovery schedule from you. So now you're going to take my field leadership and my office leadership to sit down and produce this stupid thing to make you feel better when all that energy could have been applied to limiting the constraint, right? Addressing the bottleneck. The other thing, when you were talking about like going into the trash and doing your CSI investigation of what's going on there, and when we're looking for these bottlenecks, there's a magic skill that's required. We have to be able to zoom in and then zoom out, right? Because if we just zoom in and stay zoomed in, we're going to assign responsibility for the bottleneck to the things that are in our immediate field of vision. And if we zoom out, we can see the entire system and understand, there's some other things. So example, I was on a project, the steel team, they were working on building catwalks and handrails, and we were supposed to be studying them. Showed up to watch them do their work, and they weren't working in the area they were supposed to be working at. So we walked around the building, found them, and what they were doing was they were loading, packing their stuff to go move somewhere else. And the young man I was walking with, this was all new to him, and he's like, man, like they just don't know what they're doing. Look, they're just kind of hanging out. They don't have a plan. They don't know what's going on. And I said, okay, cool. So well, let's keep walking to where they're going. And I said, what do you see over there? He's like, man, well, it looks like those big old air handlers, they're not in place yet. Like, okay. I said, okay, what do you see down the road here, quarter mile long? Man, I see air handlers all over the place. Like, okay, why aren't they in place? He's like, oh, I don't know. I was like, okay, well, let's go find out. So anyways, track it down and find out there was a piece, the connector between the building and the air handlers, there was an adjustment made to them for safety reasons. And so that impacted, like, it slowed the production. So what happened is the adjustments they were making to the connector was not, those pieces had not been delivered to the site yet. And so since the pieces hadn't been delivered to the site, they couldn't install the connector, they couldn't install the air handler, therefore they could not install the handrails and the catwalks. And so they were just looking for work. That was not their problem. The problem was further upstream. And it went, so anyways, when I showed it, he's like, oh my God, man, this whole time I've been beating them up. I'm like, I know, that's natural, is to say, well, the welders, they're just lazy. They don't know what the hell they're doing. They don't have a plan. There's no sense of urgency. No, it wasn't them. It was further upstream. I mean, we could even go as far as to say it was a poor design, because safety wasn't designed into that piece, because people were getting hurt installing it. And because of that, they made an adjustment that impacted the plan. So good on them for making the plan. But for the young man that I was coaching, he was able to see, like, oh, I said, so that's the important part. When you see the problem, let's zoom out and look at all the stuff. Let's get a broader understanding of the whole operation, even outside of the point of failure.
So what I heard was you found an idle resource.
Absolutely.
And blamed them.
Yes.
The situation was, hey, what are you doing? What are you over here? You're supposed to be up there. Like, what's going on? Left it on the surface and didn't learn to see a bottleneck. That's legit. And that happens all the time.
All the time.
I've done that dozens of times myself. Yes. And mostly out of sheer ignorance, because I don't know the constraint. I didn't know the issue.
I don't expect you to answer this, just a thought. What are the 7 deadly sins of constraint management? We get about that.
Oh, you were talking, I wrote a few down here.
No way.
Number 1, if you see resources and you blame the human beings in that resource.
Sin.
That's number 1. Number 2, if there's a constraint that you're uncomfortable about, like you have to have an uncomfortable conversation with the authority. Now you've located Herbie. You got him in your sights, slowing him down. You let it sit there because I'm afraid. That's the most cowardly thing you can possibly do. And then the third one is if you can't have that uncomfortable conversation, but you elevated it to somebody else and they also do nothing, that's worse.
It's a double whammy.
It's not double, it's like exponentially worse.
Damnation.
Because usually when you elevate an issue, it goes to someone in leadership. And if they don't do anything, that's that BS that Jen and Jess talk about. But there's many more. I wrote a couple down. When we get to the end of chapter 23, I'll round it out. 21, 22, 23, these are the sins that they kind of talk about here. So let's get into 22. And they're out in the field. And I'm sorry, maybe we alluded to it before, but they went and found the huge stack of inventory and Alex's and our dear friend Jonah, who doesn't even work there. He's just such a sage. That NCX-10, the robot, the big thing that's got all the big wigs up at corporate. There's going to be an article in a trade magazine. Like, this is serious business. And that dang thing is a constraint. So that's number 1. But in chapter 22, Alex is having a rough time at home, by the way. I really got to put a little backstory in here. 7 issues at the home life, mostly with his wife. So he's trying to regain the trust with his wife. Also, he's trying to rebuild the workflows at the factory and his relationships with people on the work site. or I guess in the factory. And then also with corporate, he's got all this stuff bounce around in his work life, but there's no separation at home. Right? You take all that with you, whether it's in your conscious mind or in your subconscious mind, it's there and it's on your mind. So when you're dealing with your personal relationships, it's still, it applies no matter what. I don't care what you're doing. So he also has to spend time and energy repairing his relationship with his wife. So like you only got so much hours in a day, number one, and two, so much energy to give. It's just eventually you burn out of energy and you have to lay down and go to sleep. So how you choose to spend that energy is incredibly important. So part of the prioritization that Alex Rogo was learning is it's not all about work. Because at the end of the day, if he loses his entire home life and his personal relationship, like what is he working for? And I wanted to make sure I didn't skip past that because it definitely weighs on people when they're trying to make improvements at work. But in chapter 22, he gets back, he comes in the next day and he's staggering in because he had this long conversation with his wife and she's staying with her family. And so he comes in and Bob's there and he's like, we got another Herbie. So now not only is the NCX10 a Herbie, they got two bottlenecks because there's two sets of inventory piling up. I guess the NCX10 is some kind of milling machine. And then after that, parts get heat treated. So when you mill materials, you can't be super brittle and nor can they be super flexible. And you put that metal into an oven and it sits in there and it has to go through a series of heating and cooling cycles. And it takes a lot of time. So here comes old Jonah, gonna sneak in here with some fluctuation. So if we have one bottleneck that's not outputting in a timely manner, if you think of this heat treating oven, there's only so much space inside this oven. The capacity of this oven is fixed. So you can't grow your oven. I suppose you could go buy one, but they're in the middle of a financial meltdown. They even like have an argument. They're like, why don't we just build another oven? So now we made a list for both heat treat and NCX10 as to which parts they each have in process in what order. Again, it's the same sequence of latest order to least late. And if there two are finding that both of these bottlenecks are creating the late orders. They're like, they can trace all of these late orders back to bottlenecks either at the NCX10 or they can trace these late orders all the way back to the freaking heat treating. So they're like, we got to dig into this. This is a problem because not only is this an inventory problem, because wait a second, if there's fixed capacity in this heat treat oven, why isn't the heat treat oven full to the brim when they run their cycle? And they're like, what? I'm like, yeah, I'm looking at the heat treat oven and it's only filled up 60%. Like, what's the deal here? And they're like, well, this order that only was filled the oven 60% is a special order. It's a special order. We had to rush through it.
Expediter.
Oh, so yes. So this is the panicking mode of the expediter. So the optimal production of that heat treat oven was like fill the dang thing up 100% and run it through its cycles. Not every assembly needs the same heat treat cycle as every other assembly. You have all kinds of variations, but you have dependent events. And now all of a sudden we have a freaking bottleneck. And even worse, they're rearranging the inventory in front of the bottleneck. So they're making the inventory in front of the bottleneck. The process of doing the rearranging is the bottleneck. It's not the heat treat oven. It's the rearranging process. They're like, you mean to tell me this expediting process is the problem?
But it was the answer to all our problems.
I'm like greatly rising. I'm probably getting half of this wrong. They start having this argument. The stakes are high because if they don't figure out this problem, they're all going to lose their jobs. So what do you think about that? Like all of a sudden they learn to see the issue and then what they see is a freaking mirror and it's pointing back at them. The decisions that we make as leadership are the bottlenecks, not the inventory. Because all these bottlenecks, it's in the decisions to make all these rearrangements and rush all these orders because the orders are late and the orders are late because all this variation that we created. And then also we're not managing these bottlenecks and we're not running our bottlenecks at full capacity. So we're not even meeting our system capacity because we have bottlenecks. It's like this vicious cycle. And they finally kind of start to get it here. We have to somehow figure out a device to prioritize this constraint. So they do that. But I'm going to pause there because I haven't heard anything. I feel like you're about to burst. But yeah. Have you, one, been in that situation? I certainly have. Two, what did you do?
Oh, so the one that comes to mind, how I was specific, and it's still one that I struggle with. It's saying yes all the time, right? Like if I don't say no, I'm going to be exhausted. You and I were talking earlier, I'll have these intermittent burnouts because I just take on too much work. And I think everybody out there, like if you're tired all the time and you feel like you ain't got time, guess who the bottleneck is? It's you, it's your system. You're letting that happen. Anyhow, but the more specific one in the workplace, there was a project manager I worked with. At this time, I was like in charge of all the labor and distributing labor to all our projects. We had one project manager who was specifically targeting owner direct work. And so it was real small projects, high margin and long lasting stuff, right? It was really good for us. But what he would do is when the client said, hey, we got to upgrade this air handler unit, or we want to change out all our grills or whatever, it didn't matter, whatever it was. He would tell them, like, can you have somebody here Monday? And his answer was always yes. And then he'd call me, oh, I got this job. We need 3 people. We need 2 duct guys, and we need a pipe fitter. And I'm like, dude, it's Thursday. We don't just have people hanging out. Oh, I got to have it. This is my most important customer. You know, the whole story, right? This, I'm doing this for y'all, whatever. Okay, jump through hoops, get them a crew out there. And then Monday, I'm getting a call. Jess, what the hell's going on? Your guys are just out here standing around. They don't have any tools. With the budget for this little project, we can't absorb this kind of downtime. And I'm like, okay, dude, you screamed and yelled that you needed somebody Monday. Got you somebody Monday. Now you're screaming and yelling that we're blowing up the budget. It's a bad image. Our people are just standing around. And we went through and like it was screaming matches between he and I for months. And finally I said, okay, time out. The one thing I can do is not give him the personnel that he wants, because he doesn't know what he needs. All he cares about is that the client is going to think he's a star and that the client isn't going to complain. And then he's worried about the budget, right? So what I started doing was like, okay, I'm not sending you people. I would send the superintendent to go scout it. Like, go check it out, get with the owner, get with whoever you need to get with. So I come up with the plan, and then let's you and I get together so we can align our resources appropriately. And I still had to fight with the project manager, but the long-term implications was it was a good win for us financially, and we still had a good relationship with the client. Now, I'm like, look, dude, we're fighting all the time, and there's no point in us fighting. So here is my request. When that client tells you they have an emergency, they need us out there, well, I need you to just ask them, can I get you somebody out here to look at it and advise us on the best course of action next week? Like, that's all you got to ask them. They get to say no. If they say no, I need somebody Monday, let's do that. But just ask them that. He started asking them, and guess what? 90% of the time, they're like, yeah, sure. Here's my whatever head of maintenance. Here's their number. Have your guy contact that guy, schedule something, come look at it, come up with the plan, and let's reconvene. And then everybody was super happy because now the superintendent that I was sending out there didn't have to drop. They were able to get that into their workflow, and things worked better. But it was that the inventory was there, like all this, just the way we function and the way we communicated, the way we thought about things, we were creating our own damn problems. And it took some iteration, but we finally got to a point where it's like, dude, just ask them, can I send you my guy next week to assess the situation and come up with a plan that's beneficial for everybody? That was it. Not that hard, but we were the problem. We were the problem.
And it was admitting it hard?
Well, for me, yeah, because no, it's not my fault. It's his damn fault. Kissing up to the client, right? He don't care about it. Like, it was so easy for me to blame him for not caring about us and only being worried about his own bones. But that wasn't the truth. I mean, there was a system problem. We had no system in place. So he was doing what he would naturally do that made sense to him. I was doing what I would naturally do that made sense to me. And I had to say, wait a minute, how am I contributing to this? Like, oh, well, I'm giving him what he wants. Knowing what the outcome's going to be, I can change that. And so little by little, we had to come to terms with it.
How about once you had the honest realization from that moment, what was uncomfortable after?
So the uncomfortable part after was all the guys that I would ream because they were not as productive as they could have been. Like, come on, guys. Like, y'all could be cleaning, you could be ordering. It wasn't their fault, man. It wasn't their fault. It was my fault. And I had to like face that. Like, here I was getting the pressure from my project manager, knowing that it's wrong and it's like coming from a bad place, and then passing some of that on to the guys. Like that's just not cool. But I was doing it, right? Like it was those kinds of things. The guys would be like, man, you've settled down. I'm like, yeah, I just kind of stopped causing my own problems, man.
You just uncovered another sin.
Oh,
because you nailed it. When you uncover a bottleneck and it's people are uncomfortable, or worse, you've uncovered a constraint, you're going to face resistance.
Oh, yes.
And don't let that resistance stop you.
Yes.
So the sin is like if you're mining for gold and you got to get to the seam, but the seam is like a mile under the ground and you stop 10 inches from the seam and you don't know, right? But don't let non-believers gaslight you into thinking you're the crazy one. If you have influence in your own personal life, if you face resistance, don't give up. Try again. You might have to try a different tactic. So that's kind of like the summary of chapter 22. There's some arguments happening, some shouting matches, because we need those parts now, not tomorrow. The non-bottleneck parts we might not need for weeks or even months, maybe never. So by continuing to run the non-bottleneck parts, this guy was actually interfering with our ability to get an order out the door and make money. He's like, this guy is the reason why we're losing money at this plant. If you're going to start prioritizing your constraints, be also prepared to design in a system for conflict resolution that they are locked together. That's chapter 22. What do you think?
Oh, man. So the idea here takes me back to what we were talking about a little while ago in learning to see, right? Like the tactical patience required for a change agent is enormous, right? And a method or system to facilitate the change with the naysayers and maintain, like, because you're the tip of the spear. So you are going to hit all the friction first. Now that you can see it, you got to assume nobody else can see it. And changing it, even though you understand it's an improvement, is going to change the way people function. Period. Like, period. All the business sense it makes is great. It doesn't matter. Because if I have to change the way I behave, the way I've been showing up, the way I've been doing things, the way my universe has changed all of a sudden. And I don't want that. It's going to take extra energy. And so just because you can see, you need to like pump the brakes big time, because people, they can't. And so you're this crazy prophet saying that the world's flat or the world's not flat or whatever. You know what I mean? You got this idea that nobody else understands. Where in the world are you coming from? You're crazy. Why would they change? And if you're not patient and respect the people and meet them where they're at, you're going to give up. You're going to quit, or you may get fired. Right? I think about the people that were like lean champions within their organization that are now consultants. And some of them, not all of them, some of them got sick and tired of swimming uphill with an organization that wasn't open to that kind of change. And so they blamed the organization, saying, well, they just didn't want to change. You were the zealot raising hell, pushing, screaming, and yelling. So yeah, maybe they didn't want to change, but also, what was your organizational patience? How much tactical patience did you apply?
By the way, there's some tactics about to get dropped. I grabbed the book by Jocko Willink. It's Leadership, Strategy, and Tactics. And it really talks about that. You got to know how to flank them, right? Not everybody goes and becomes a consultant. Some of us just go roll back into operations. Yes, if you're into this continuous improvement, like, good on you for doing that, because that is a super risky, psychologically unsafe position to have such different mindset about your work than everybody else. And you're like the few, the proud, the lean champions. But it won't happen overnight, and you can't just assume people will see things the way you do. So if you haven't, this is the tactic. You have to also design in a system for conflict resolution. And you also have to design a system and to do these silly simulations, right? So people can learn how to see waste and learn how to see bottlenecks. Yeah. So that's an incredibly powerful statement. So let's talk about the tactics that Alex and the gang do. So they use a coloring system. They use signaling. They do 2 markers. They say, okay, we got work in process. We're going to tag the bottleneck workflow. We're going to give that a red tag. And if it goes through a non-bottleneck, so it doesn't go through NCX10 and it doesn't go through heat treat, it gets a green tag. So if you're at your workstation and 2 sets of inventories roll in, you have a choice. But now we've taken that choice away. We've designed a system to remove the choice. We've also designed a system to remove our bottleneck, the expediting process. Say, no more expediting. There's one choice. If it's red, you do it first, because whatever your part of the production is, that's the critical, because that has to go through the NCX10, or it has to go through heat treat, or both. Rule 1. Rule 2, green. If it shows up, you don't have anything, there's no reds, then work the greens. So they're like, we're removing the first bottleneck that we've discovered that we created in this decision-making system. We've eliminated the decision-making system. We're going to use signals. We're going to say red, do first, green, only if there's no red.
Nope. This is going to be maybe a stretch. And I'm thinking about it because it reminds me of the first job you and I walked together when I was onboarding.
Ooh.
The smell of pan oil is a signal to me. When they spray the pan oil on the shoring or the pans when they're pouring concrete.
It's a very distinct smell, yeah.
Yeah, I love that smell. I know that's weird, but to me, it's like, oh yeah, we got a brand new bake. For me, it was like, all right, hey, let's check and get ready. Yeah. Who's going to come in at 2 a.m. for the damn pour? Like, that was what it signaled.
That's a good one. I didn't even think about the smell.
Mm-hmm.
My favorite signals are for issues. So if there's some kind of problem, you flag it. A flag can be many things. That signaling process resolves so many issues.
Yeah.
So the signaling tactic, the red and the green tags, or the smell, I guess, I like it, is important. And if you have those tactics, make sure that they're implemented well. So chapter 22 talks about quality control. Oh, damn. Is quality control a constraint? But here's the thing. What they did was, okay, so we have this constraint. Our decision-making, our expediting system is causing all kind of problems. Boom, fix that. All right, what's next? Heat treat is not running at full capacity. And even though we're now filling it full, the capacity is not meeting the demand. It's still a bottleneck. And we don't have the capability from corporate to go build another heat treat machine. However, we do have the capability to subcontract out the heat treat process. When these set of red tag parts sits in front of the heat treat machine every day at 1 o'clock, we're going to have a truck pick whatever inventory is in front of it and ship it to this vendor. And that way, the next day, all of the parts are through heat treat, no matter what they went through the third party. And yes, it's a premium to go to the third party, actually saving money in the long run if you get everything through the bottleneck. So they come to that realization. So they're like, okay, damn, we're kind of like on a roll here. And this is when you have to engage with your field leadership, or actually trades. The people who actually do the machining that aren't robots have to know how to use all kinds of micro millimeter make adjustments. They're not as productive as the robot, but the robot is a bottleneck. We have idle resources. We have some of our machinists just sitting around doing nothing who could be operating these manual machines. Oh, damn. Now, all of a sudden, they found the Herbie, and they found the capability to lighten the load off of Herbie with an old school method. And I think that's incredibly important. I wonder how much that's designed into this book. But as you go out, you find the bottleneck, and you're like, well, how are we going to make this machine better? And then the actual solution, or at least a partial solution to the problem, was let's use a completely manual method that was like, we've been doing this since like the Bronze Age, right?
Yep.
So you take a completely traditional approach to a completely like old school method is the solution. That's a good story.
Yes.
Have you done that? Oftentimes, the solution is right there in front of you.
Super simple.
Or the guy who you think is like crusty and stuck in their way and super old school, doesn't like technology, they got the solution. They got it.
Yes. This is going to seem silly, but remember when lasers, all of a sudden you had these little remote lasers that could transfer light? I love them. I mean,
love them. Yeah.
Right. When it first came out, it's like, man, all right, we can lay out. It'll make layout way faster. And there was a whole bunch of sheetrock and stuff in the way so that we couldn't really get our points so that we could have a laser transferred up on overhead, right? Because we had to do a bunch of stuff, some intricate stuff overhead, and that laser was going to help us. And man, I'm like, all right, let's go get the pipe fitter so we can move all this stuff and let's get some more people. And old boys looks at me, he's like, dude, like, really, you're going to move all of this stuff so you can get your little laser out there that we can barely see because the sun's out. And I'm like, well, yeah, but this is what we need to do. And he's like, yeah, but you don't need a laser, man. He says, you got your plumb bob? I'm like, man, I don't want to use a plumb bob going up. He said, no. He says, do you have your plus? Yeah, I got my plumb bob. He said, okay, let's mark a point here and mark a point here. Okay, I'm following you. So we just marked 2 points, transferred them from the ground up overhead. And we used the string on my plumb bob, right? Like, it's a string, dummy. Never. I'm thinking I'm bringing all kinds. We need higher powered lasers. We need the green laser that you could see in the daylight. We got to move all this material. Like, no, dummy, just use a string, bro. Like, okay, I'm going to shut my mouth now. You got it.
They used the plumb bob. There's actually artifacts of that technology being used in the pyramids. That's a tried and true method. Like it's been used for thousands and thousands of years. That's awesome.
Yeah, man.
And it works and it functioned. But here's the thing: the only way to learn how to use a plumb bob, you gotta learn how to use a plumb bob. Those are awesome. But the last paragraph of chapter 22, I think it's my favorite paragraph in the book. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'll read the last. They bring in these ancient milling machines in. The maintenance man connects the power cable to an outlet on a nearby steel column. Bob reaches for the power switch and hits the on button. For a second, nothing happens. Then we hear a slow, gathering whir from somewhere in the guts of the old machine. Poofs of dust blow out of the antique fan housing. Bob turns to me with a dumb grin on his big face. Guess we're in business. Like, yeah, this was Bob's idea. So think about that. You've just invested like some serious social capital trust into these craft workers. People are going to be like, okay, we're going to get excited. This is a reinforcing effect. This is our most profitable line, and we're going to trust you to do this manually. We took these machines away from you and gave you this robot. Now we're going to bring these machines back, and we're going to trust you to do this as effectively to make sure that we become super productive. It's an important part of this chapter. So in this chapter, Ralph Nakamura is the plant data manager. He's the numbers cruncher in terms of production. He knows exactly when things turn on and off. All this manufacturing facility, we build them all the time, all kinds of controls on them and sensors and stuff. So Ralph comes in, everybody's high-fiving. They're like, oh, we're going to save our jobs. Ralph's like, we're still not doing good.
It ruined the whole party.
I'm going to memorize here a whole bunch. But he's like, hey, what's happening is that, yeah, you've eliminated some bottlenecks, but we haven't completely resolved it. And now it's worse because your bottlenecks keep switching. So they go in CX10 and it's like heat treat. And it goes over here. It just keeps moving around because they haven't completely optimized the system and figured out what is the optimal resource capacity. Where are the true constraints? He said, hey, this is great. We got these machines rolling, but here's the problem. This CX10 machine still needs a run. And if we're running these machines with machinists, the machinists used to set up the robot. They used to do the setup. So now it makes the robot even less productive because the guys are over there running these milling machines by hand, and they're not being super productive on the CX10. He's like, well, that's only part of the time, though. You only have to be over there setting up the NCX10 when you have to do a changeover or a setup. And Bob goes, what happens if stealing people turns non-bottlenecks into bottlenecks? So he's like, hey, if we pull people off one and send them to the other one, and even though they're on a non-bottleneck, does it just switch? Do we just change the bottleneck? So you have to think about this, because once you start to do optimization, you can't even let off the gas. You almost have to double down. That's why tag planning comes into play. You can't do tag planning on a non-optimized system. But once you have some just minor levels of optimization and you apply tag, now you start to see all your bottlenecks start to show up, and then you start to make adjustments and you add buffers and do that stuff. This is exactly what's happening in this chapter, is don't let up, don't let off, and don't give up. So they start to talk about this magical word called flow. So think about flow. It's like water, and you think about a stream. And you think about a stream having a boulder in it. And in front of the boulder, there's another boulder, but it's smaller. If you spend a whole bunch of your energy removing one of the boulders, do you not still have a roadblock, right? You still do. So you can't let off. But perhaps the process of removing one of the boulder slowed down the flow enough. I forgot who told this to me. It was so genius. I'm like, maybe the flow was wrong to begin with. Like, if you would have just slowed the flow down just slightly, we could have just removed one boulder. But instead, we went after this big, huge, nasty boulder. You have to start understanding that when we're dealing with flow and you're dealing with bottlenecks might move around and stuff. We have to think about that optimization piece, and we have to think about starting to prioritize. But the only measurement we should worry about, instead of the tactics that we said, hey, only work on the red, that tactic was right when we started it. Now that tactic created new bottlenecks because of this decision we make. So they start to look at heat treat. They look at the stacks of inventory. It's like, oh my God, we're overlapping batches. So our pretty system was good, but now it's flawed because we've changed the flow of the work. Yeah. We've started to pick up the speed of the work, but we haven't really fixed the solution. So now we have non-bottlenecks becoming bottlenecks. They're moving around on us.
Yeah.
So the rule that Dr. Goldratt teaches us is that, hey, when you remove a bottleneck or you remove a constraint, another one's going to appear, and you have to be ready for that.
It's okay, right? Like, it's a natural occurrence. It's not because people suck. It's not because you picked the wrong one. It's not because you're doing it wrong. It's because when you remove a bottleneck, another one will appear.
Always.
Every single time.
This is deep, and this is important to kind of think, because you're going to do optimization. You're going to have some early wins, but oftentimes the changes create more capacity. So now we've unloaded Herbie, but now we've loaded one of the faster kids, and now that kid's getting tired.
Yep.
We have a new Herbie. So the problem was that it wasn't even Herbie's fault. It was the fact that we didn't plan out exactly how we're going to load the kids.
Right.
And that was a problem. I guess that's the parents' fault. I don't want to go down that far, but that's the idea, that if you have and you create changes, you got to set up work ahead of the constraint. I think that's incredibly important. So that's a new rule. So when you do work on constraints and you don't set up the next task for success, they might have been the A player before.
Not no more.
But now we've changed the rules, and the A players, now the B players rank people. But that's often what's happened. So you have to not only be like, hey, we gotta start this next task. And we now have to be like, now Jesse's crew is not doing 10 feet per day. He can do 30 feet a day. And now all of a sudden he's out. He's almost to the street. Like he wants to do his hookup. I don't have a permit to do the hookup to make the connection in the street for a sanitary line because I haven't paid the bill for the water department.
Yes.
I think your brother does this, right?
Yeah. He works for the local water system. Now, this reminds me, Thomas, I remember when you said it.
But now it's a new constraint. Like, if you haven't thought about, damn, Jesse's crew is like he's knocking out of the park. He's almost ahead of schedule. He's like, oh, hey, did you get the permit yet for the city to come make the tap? oh shit, right? Like, how do I know this? Because I've said those words.
Yep.
But now I've just placed a constraint, Jesse, because I didn't plan the work ahead. So you have to think about, you can't only just think about the bottleneck, but you have to think about, if we remove this bottleneck, what's the thing that the next that's gonna come up. So you can't ever get up or ever start high-fiving himself. And Ralph Nakamura kind of like blows their candles out. But it's an important learning moment, I think.
Yes. Well, so a couple things. One, I remember we were in Chicago. We were at a face-to-face with all the RLMs, and you said finishing early is waste.
Oh, is this the infamous like CPM summit?
No. I think this was before that. But you sat there and you said finishing early is waste. And I was like, finally, buddy, that I can relate to, because I have a problem with the finishing early thing. Like, if the next thing isn't ready to go, so what?
Yeah.
So what if you finished early?
Yeah.
If you're anyhow, that's like a big discussion, right? With the whole crew.
Oh yeah, people get all off the rails there. Luckily, I didn't give up.
Yes,
I wasn't gaslit into thinking I was crazy because I had
no. It's a problem. The other thing you mentioned
finishing early is not necessarily bad. Finishing early and not having a plan for that crew to finish early is now a waste, because the whole point of finishing early is defeated.
Yeah, you accomplish nothing. If
you may have received the gold star for production, but the next week we'll have idle constraints again. And there we go. Here's a mortal sin: give constraints resources. Don't let them sit idle. And if you're uncomfortable or afraid, go find help. And if they're afraid, then we're screwed. Don't let up. And I'll tell you, like that company that we used to work for, they actually had a constraint that was so big. This is a hospital project that they were working in Aurora, Colorado. Needed an act of Congress in Washington, D.C. It needed an act of Congress to restart that. Talk about I'd probably float that one up to the top of the constraint list.
Yep. That's a big one.
So, but yeah, like, don't let off. Like, and keep elevating. Hey, your boss don't want to do anything? Get out of the way. I'm gonna go talk to the general manager. All right, you don't like it? We'll go talk to the division manager. Get to division. Yep. That's called managing up and down the chain of command.
Yes.
That's an extreme ownership reference, but
yes,
that's important. So yeah, that's why that's a super long. Thank you for triggering me. Why finishing early is bad. And it's only bad if you're not ready for that. So if you just be like, hey, they finished it 3 weeks early, congratulations. When we update the critical path, did we pull it in by 3 weeks? Well,
big deal.
What? Right? Whoop-de-doo. Yes, I'm definitely going to congratulate that crew for doing a good job. But,
absolutely. The other thing you mentioned,
perhaps they could have worked 6 hours instead of 8, or whatever.
Right?
Deep clean the corners, or maintain their equipment, or open blades, or do that kind of stuff.
Yes. The other thought
that's chapter 25. I'm like, it's so good.
Press the brakes.
But we got to talk about when Alex Rogo gets hammered.
Oh,
we have to put that in first.
Yes. But, I don't know anything about that.
But I think there's so many lessons to be learned there. You have to learn how to see problems. Once you see problems, don't trust that you know that that's the problems. You have to let the facts and data tell you that your assumption is correct. And then when you find that assumption is correct, you make a decision, you move the OODA loop, and sometimes those solutions might be highly manual. And then don't stop there, keep going, because when those solutions are going to change the flow of work, they're going to change capacity of processes, of dependent events. And when those changes happen, stuff's going to finish early and wait. So you have to start anticipating those. So how do you anticipate those? Start doing time and motion study on your A crew.
Yes.
You don't. They're 3 weeks ahead of schedule, Thomas. Why are you doing time and motion study? I'll be like, because when this crew that's behind them is now doing work at twice their rate, they're going to catch them.
Yes.
And that happened in my construction project.
Yeah.
We actually found that, and what happened was we found that the drywall, so the drywall early on didn't work at a very productive rate. And if you've done high-rise work, or at least vertical work, it's the first few floors are really difficult because just the capacity is different. Your crew is smaller. It's hard to get in the building. Things are still rough because the project is set up for structure. So it's set up for hoisting things in the air. Now all of a sudden we're putting finishes in, permanent studs and drywall, and especially the drywall piece, because it's a very fragile and it gets ruined with moisture.
Yes.
So what we had was, and the initial plan was you always do the enclosure, make it dry temporarily, and then you put the drywall in. Well, we had a problem on our project with supply chain.
Yep.
And I won't get into the ins and out of it, but we had a supply chain. We had many supply chain. So we had to make a decision. And this is the moment when we had to make this decision. And this decision had to be made by project leadership because it became we had to spend some money on our idea. And this money was not insignificant, but we decided that if the enclosure and the dry-in part of the project was the bottleneck, and it is, because you can't install drywall even in California. It's going to get rain, it's going to get moldy, it's bad. You don't want the good people at LinkedIn to have a unhealthy air quality. So we made sure that none of that drywall got destroyed with rain by having a temporary enclosure. And this temporary enclosure was like shrink wrap, like when you winterize a yacht, or like you put this really heavy duty plastic wrapping, and then you heat it up and it shrinks. We did this on a building in San Francisco, and it wasn't perfect. It had all kinds of issues, but what it did was it kept the water, when the rain would come in, it kept it from getting into the building and touching the drywall. And what that allowed us to do was open up flow, because now we're not waiting for this supply chain issue of enclosure. We're going to put a temporary enclosure on it. That was the workaround, but it's not such a workaround where it's going to get us in trouble.
Right.
We're going to manage our water with this temporary enclosure. We made a decision. It was like, damn. Then all of a sudden, drywall was able to pass the enclosure crew, and they're like, there's nothing stopping us because we're not waiting on the enclosure piece. Is there one building behind me? That's maybe not, but there wasn't anything stopping them. So now their capacity went exponentially huge, and now they can add all kinds of resources to it. So their crew size got huge, and their production went, if you were charting it like I was on a line, and the pitch changed very significantly, and they were able to move up that building really fast, so that they actually caught the next constraint was the fire stopping. They looks like oatmeal. And if you remember my previous story, the fire stopping was constrained by concrete.
Yes.
So we were starting to tighten through looking for bottlenecks. We were starting to increase our capacity through looking at bottlenecks, making decisions, creating temporary structures, whatever it is, like thinking outside the box, executing it, making a decision, doing that operation, spending the money.
Yep.
We were better for it. And that, I'm not saying everybody here go shrink wrap your building as a solution. It only works in this specific test case. But and it wasn't perfect. It had all kinds of issues. My God. But we had to look at the brutal facts and make a decision, and not lean on the people, the trades, being like, hey, you guys are super slow. You should work faster. So that's kind of the chapter 24, and a little preview 20, or chapter 23, a little preview 25. 25, ooh, it's so good. But
yeah.
But we got to talk about boozing it up. Chapter 24. So
yes.
Bob. Let me get to it. But they started to have some wins, and they're like, we need to toast. We need to have a toast. So they break out the bottle of amber liquid in the office. This is day drinking at work. I guess it's champagne.
Yeah.
They get the champagne in the coffee cup. I may or may not have done this. We'll just let that lie.
Yeah. No witnesses. You're good.
Yes, there may have been some amber liquid in a coffee cup once or twice, but only in an office, never out on a job site. But so they start to have a few, and they're starting to feel the feel the effects. And Bill Peach calls and wanted to thank Alex for, hey, you really came through on that shipment to Johnny John's. He's super happy about it, and he's starting to turn the ship around. Even their little improvements that they're making, customers at the end of the line, their end customers are starting to notice, and they're starting to notice like very rapidly. And not only are they feeling the effects, so this is that reinforcing effect. It feels good. The team gets involved. We start being more productive. This is like, it really feels good. And it starts to have indicators. And usually we're in my job, especially as a quality leader, that indicator is satisfied customers, and not satisfied. Like people on the end who pay our bills become satisfied, and they tell us about it.
Yes.
And I have no greater satisfaction than taking those calls and then being like, hey, and going back to that team and being like, hey, like great job, and here's why. And I wanted to tell you that I was on your case before, and now I'm sorry. So now like a weight has lifted, and through this optimization, Bill Peach, I guess he's like the CEO of the division, and Alex, the plant manager, are repairing their relationship, and it was super strained.
Yep.
Before. So yeah. So what do you think about that? Have you ever been now Alex goes on to have a few too many, and he gets a ride home with with one of his female coworkers, and they walk in the door, and there's a moment, and it's very light, it's not serious, but they fall on the floor, and his wife, who comes home and is trying to surprise him, finds him hammered and on top of his female coworker, and they're laughing.
Yes.
So,
Danger zone.
Yeah, you gotta take everything with moderation. What I'm trying to say, but yes. It does feel good to have a reinforcing effect, and it starts to build upon itself, and then there's output from it. But you still got to take that home, take that win home. Don't just let the good times roll at work, and then come at home and just blast it in front of her, because the people at home don't know that you won, or they don't know that you're feeling good. You got to tell them. And if you just go out there and you tie one on, and then you come home in a puddle, that's all they see is you intoxicated in a puddle. And it doesn't, right? There's that transition piece when you go from work to home, and there's pain that's associated with that. So I think that's kind of like the lesson to be learned. What do you think about that?
Yeah, there's a bunch there, right? So I know for me, when I was in miserable states, there's one project, like the worst one I was ever on. I was in a relationship, and I told her, I was like, hey, I got to go dive into this lake of misery, so I'm not going to be available. And I didn't call her for 5 months. And then I called her after 5 months, which was awkward, but to me, it made perfect sense because I said, I'm going to be busy. But the learning I had, which is relative to what you're saying, is the people in our lives care about us, and they want the best for us. And we usually don't mind sharing our misery with them, but we're horrible at sharing our wins with them. And in this situation, he was celebrating the win with his team, but hadn't planned or had anything in place so that he could celebrate the wins with his wife at home. And I know, because I'm guilty of this. Like, no. I leave my problems at work, and I don't bring them home. Maybe I don't, just because I'm not talking about them doesn't mean I'm not bringing my problem home. Because if I'm short and I'm frustrated and I'm distracted, I may not be talking about my problems at work, but I'm bringing my problem home. and they are living through that. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden I'm in a good mood. And they're like, what are you smoking, bro? Like, what's going on?
Literally.
Right? Like, what is happening with you? And so we're human beings. We cannot completely separate, right? What's the word you use? Like, it permeates, it gets through the membrane.
There's no membrane.
There's no membrane.
Or the membrane is porous. Yeah.
Yes. And so when we're having a tough time at work, our family feels it. The people that care about, they feel it, they see it, and they're there for you during that time. And when you have a win, let them be there with you for that time also. Like, it takes a conscious effort to really make that and do that well.
Yeah. And give a little credit to Alex. He didn't know his wife came home to surprise him. But I guess these days it'd be like, hey, gonna go have a couple pops with my friends. We had a good day at work. Be home late. Give somebody a heads up. And then that's the communication piece. That hey, my mood has changed because I've had a shift in mindset, and we've done all this cool stuff, and I want to tell you about it. But instead, he didn't do that because he put a wall in between his work and his home life.
Yes,
and there's consequences. Consequences, and all his wife saw was him walking in with Stacy. I guess she's like one of the expediters, and I was like, "What the heck?" And she hasn't been home. Like, what does that look like? That doesn't look like
horrible.
Look good at all, even though it was all innocent. It don't look good. Yeah. So, there's a lot of lessons to unpack there, because if you're having a good day at work, you're gonna hopefully take that home and have that good day the rest of the night. But if you don't, you might also have problems at home that you're going to run into, and then you'll feel it. And then also, if you have a bad day at work, you're going to bring that in you. And whether that's in your conscious brain or if it's in your subconscious, it's still going to come out. There is no membrane, and we have to carry that and communicate our emotion no matter where we are in our world.
Yes.
I think that's incredibly important, and that's true for me, and I still need to work on that so much. But I at least I try to now say we have good days, we have rough days, that we share that. That way, you come into the conversation kind of understanding what the mood is. But that's 24. 25. My summary, that's all I wrote. Stop futile work.
Oh, yes.
Jonah comes back right out of the gate. Jonah, they pick him up at the airport. Jonah is doing a sight walk. He is going and seeing Gigambutsu. Get some boots on. Jonah's got questions. He's got questions. He's doing the David Verbal thing. Questions. And so they're walking around, and they've had some wins. Like, they're like, hey, this is awesome. Like, we check this out. Like, we have these bottling. We have this robot, and we have the machinist helping out with capacity. We got the heat treat. We're sending the excess stuff to the third party, and then at the end, they're all like thinking they're gonna get high fives by Jonah, but oh no! They're bragging, and this is probably like half the walks I've been on with my management. They're like, this is not great, Thomas, but I'm thinking I'm just the bee's knees. Yes. But they start bragging about their tag system, their signaling system, and he starts to challenge Jonah, this jet setting consultant, starts to challenge the signaling system. He starts to challenge it, and he says, "You're only getting so many works out of the day. Like, you're only like you're like, how do you know that the red is the true? Like how do you even know?" And he starts to challenge this, and they actually find an error. They find somebody doing green tag work when there's a red tag stuff, and he's like, "Hey, well, we got this problem." And it's right there in front of Jonah, and they start to see inventory again. And they're like, and I like this. It's page 275, and it's like, it's stacked as high as the biggest forklift can reach. It's not just a mountain, but a mountain with many peaks.
Yep.
Piles are even bigger than before we identified the machine as a bottleneck. We tied to every bin, hanging from every pallet is a red tag, and somewhere behind it all, its own hugest obscured from our view is the NCX10. So even though they were like, we got this figured out, they just all that they did was create more inventory. They haven't mastered throughput yet.
Yeah.
And it was only through like a series of questions that Jonah, they actually see this. So Jonah goes, by the way, do you remember when I told you that a plant in which everyone is working all the time is very inefficient? So they're like, hey, everybody's back on task. We got capacity over here. These guys are doing this. We're sending stuff off to third parties. So boom, boom, boom. We got this. And we're like, Jonah's like, nah, you're back to where you were. Everybody's working again. Like, this is bad.
Mm-hmm.
So he, oh God, this is so good. I want to read this whole chapter. But what do you think about that? Well, let me read ahead. What do you think about when you think you've got it down, and you have somebody be like, "What's up with this quality control process at the end?" And like, why are they reworking red tagged things? Like, this assembly has defects, and it's went through a red tag process, so that means it got priority, and that it went through here and went through this machine. We did all this stuff. We had all this stuff. We had all these conferences, and at the end of the day, we're still throwing away a part of the. We're having to send these defective parts back through machining again because they didn't pass quality inspection. Is that an issue?
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So Jonah gets a piece of chalk and he writes it on the floor. And he starts to write this equation on the floor, and he starts to draw like, oh, see this problem right here? Then this is defective piece. It goes back, and like you don't have 600 hours to do it. You only have 450 hours because of all this rework.
Yep.
Yeah. So it's again, they have. What's 600 minus 400? They have 150 hours of idle resources because of quality errors.
Yes. Because
they put their quality check at the end.
Yes. Oh, yes.
This is why this is my favorite chapter, because this cuts deep.
Yes.
Because if you're only inspecting quality, like looking for errors and defects at the end of that entire production run, all that entire production run that has defects, that you just created trash.
Yes. Yes.
Or you created something that you have to go run it again.
Yes.
That sucks.
It does. It brings back.
They hate it. They hate it when the quality guy shows up and you're like, crap. Like, we're gonna fail in an inspection. Never failed in an inspection.
Oh God, yes. We had nightmare. Two things it reminds me of. It was a project, and our production planning was very tight, and it was just internal. It wasn't with the GC, it was just trade. And the foreman asked me, he's like, Jess, so how many, like, your plan doesn't account for leaks? I'm like, okay. He says, so how many leaks are acceptable? And I'm like, I don't understand the question. Like, none. Like, there's no leaks in the drawings. There's no spec item calling for leaks, so we don't need to install them. Like, we don't have to, for real. Which was kind of funny. It wasn't funny to him, but it was funny to me. And what we did, it is a perfect example of what you're talking about. Because of the way there was a whole bunch of stuff going on the first floor of this building. It was a renovation of an old historic brewery, and the design hadn't been worked out. Elevations hadn't been worked out, but they wanted to hurry up and go with the guest rooms. So there was hotel rooms up above. Okay. So we go to town roughing in all the cast iron for all of these guest rooms. But because we weren't tied into the bottom, the decision was made, and I was ignorant, like I didn't pay close enough attention to continue installing without tech. And so we installed a whole stack of rooms because you know what? They're going to get the answer next week. Next week came, they still don't have the answer. Okay, well, let's do another stack of rooms and another stack of rooms. By the time we knew it, we had like, who knows, I don't know, 40 units roughed in. None of them had been inspected. At this point, it's like, okay, they're never going to figure, like, we cannot be waiting for them anymore. We got to test. We can't test with water because there's nowhere to dump the water because we can't install the mains. So we start testing with air. It's very difficult to find your leaks on a no-hub cast iron system when you're testing with air and you have, I don't know, 3,000 joints to find them. And what we just, so it was a bear, right? We had to hunt in for lead, wasting time. And it got to the source of it because we kept installing. Saying, no. I said, whoever's in, like, is it the same crew? Yeah, it's the same crew. It's like, okay, stop. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, we got to, I said, no, stop. Because they've installed all of these leaks. Like, they're doing something in their process is creating these leaks. Oh, come on, Jess. I'm like, man, it's not a curse. Like, let's just go watch what they're doing. So what ended up being, they had one of the helpers on the team, on that cast iron team, when he was assembling the bands, he wasn't torquing them down. He was using this. We bought these fancy Milwaukee torque screw guns. They weren't screw guns, but they were specifically for no-hub bands. And they had a certain torque adjusted to tighten to the right torque.
Oh, yeah.
He had his own little Milwaukee drill that he used instead.
Oh, like an impact?
Yeah, like just a little impact or something. It looked the same.
Calibrated. Yeah.
It wasn't calibrated. So he was going to town with his drill, but it never torqued the damn bands. So every damn band he installed had a leak. Yeah. And so to your point, right, the quality check was at the end of the installation. And so, you know, of course, I lost it a little bit, had to go, come back, walk it off, come back and say, all right, guys, I'm sorry, but this is the deal. We've lost 120 man hours testing, and we still haven't found all the leaks.
Testing is not a very productive use of anyone's time.
Not at all.
Right?
Not at all.
Filling it up with water.
Yes.
Looking for errors. Yeah.
Yes. So I said, let's go through, let's get 2 pieces of cast iron. I want you to cut it and I want you to assemble it. And I want to watch how y'all are doing.
Damn. You did a mock-up?
Yes, because I'm trying to figure this out. And that's when I realized, like, wait a minute. I see and I had my own old school torque wrench, right? To make sure, because I was automatically just blaming the tool.
Oh, yes.
Right. And so I said, person A, go for it. Boom, torque. Okay, good. That one's a good one. Next one, person B, torque. Okay, good. Person C, like, oh man, I had to crank down on it. And I was like, oh man, it's your drill. Son of a gun. Like, dude, how long have you been using the drill? Since I got here, like he was excited. I just bought it. I'm like, calm down. It's like, all right, bro, I love your drill, but you cannot use that drill on this system. I'm not blaming you, but I'm going to bet that that's the source of our leak. No, it's not. Check it out. It's okay. Let's do another one. And then I want you to use my torque wrench to see if it's set. Okay. He did the other one. He's like, oh, and it
turned over.
Yeah. I was able he was able to give it a couple turns. He was like, oh, like, you know, he didn't do it on purpose. He just didn't know. And we hadn't designed, like, from that, my takeaway was like, man, how many times have I put somebody to install cast iron or run domestic water, pro press, solder, doesn't matter, whatever system we're using, and just said, go do it, and didn't verify that they had the right tools or the right technique to use that system. So by failing to do that little introductory, hey, when you're running cast iron, this is what you do. When you're soldering copper, use this size tip, not this size tip for this size copper. We don't do that. We just say, go run it. And then we got leaks and we're wondering, or my favorite is threaded pipe. I love running thread. That's my ultimate favorite is to run screw pipe. But you got to check the threads every 8 to 10 joints that you make, because the threading die, it's got some wiggle in it. And after you've threaded so many joints, you got to adjust it again. You got
the machine.
Yes, the teeth of the die, the threading die, you got to adjust it. And I was really good at it because I would do that, and I wouldn't have a lot of leaks. And people thought I was just like super strong and would tighten the hell out of it. No, it wasn't that. I was always checking my teeth to make sure they were at the right. Yeah. And so, anyways, moving that quality check to the back end of it cost. It was a damn nightmare. It gave me a couple ulcers.
Yes, but okay, boom, you nailed it. While you were talking, I wrote down some rules, some summary points. I was kind of rambling, but Jonas says exactly what you said. He says, and the example you were saying was, hey, we had a quality problem because the torque, the machine that we're using didn't
torque it right. Yep.
Torque it down to the specification that was required, and we made a mistake, and we didn't stop the futile work. The futile work was the guy thinking he was torquing into specs, but not, and then not checking it.
Yes.
So Jonah has the same issue because we're so productive with this red tag, green tag system. Now we're killing it. And he's like, you got piles of inventory. No, this is not a good idea. He says, create a simple rule. He goes, we can form a simple rule which will be true in every case. The level of utilization of a non-bottleneck is not determined by its own potential, but by some other constraint in the system. So if you have a non-bottleneck, you got it. What's the thing on a horse? The reins?
Yep. The reins.
Slow it down. I don't ride horses, but I do watch Western movies. So they pull on the reins to slow the horse down. And the horse is trained that it knows when the reins get pulled, it's supposed to slow down. So what he says is, you guys, if you have non-bottlenecks, don't work them. And it's like,
oh my God, no, not possible.
What do you mean? And then they're like, what do you mean if we don't keep our machines and our workers productive, we will get bad production numbers, and those go to corporate. Like, it's fear. Now it's like, guys, you're not. So the note I wrote, it's kind of cryptic here. Do not pursue an activity that does not progress towards the goal. Do not pursue an activity that does not lead to achieving the goal. I repeat, stop futile work.
Yes.
And that's hard because oftentimes reining in the thoroughbred is not allowed.
Yeah.
Or there's consequences.
Yes.
Because of the traditional mindset of things. But what I want to say is that if you have non-bottlenecks working even at lowering, and they're still producing, and they're producing inventory, and the inventory is getting all piled up, you're just creating waste.
Yep.
Take the A team.
Yep.
And have them go do training.
Yeah.
Deep clean, or go torque test the bands.
Yes.
On the let's do extra water testing, so that when we do the water tests in front of the inspector, no factor, we get to go, right? Yeah. So it's you have to stop futile work, and this is a rule or a law. I don't know what it is, but if you don't take that step, you will have you might be super productive and everybody's humming along, but your operation will be not running at optimum capacity because all you're doing is creating inventory and getting in the way, and you're burning people's energies for nothing. And then also, when you have inventory, here comes the secret about overproduction. It leads to all of the other 8 or 7 wastes. It's the mother of all the wastes. It'll lead to all your quality problems. So if you have any inventory laying around, you're going to have quality problems. So guess what? Quality leader of a very large general contractor, what is my indicator for quality problems?
Production. Yep.
Any kind of overproduction that's happening, I already know. I don't know what the situation is, but I already know there's going to be some errors and defects. And that we're going to do forensic analysis on that inventory. And that's what they do here. That's what they do in this chapter. They stop the futile work. So and guess what it is? This is the zinger, and it's right here on. I don't know what it is. I'm trying to find it real quick, but it's so you don't do the inventory, and then I wrote, do not optimize Hollywood metrics.
Ooh, but
what I mean by Hollywood is that it's an actor, or it's fiction.
Yes.
Or it's a metric that looks cool on a dashboard, and it makes us feel good. It's like, damn, the guys are super productive. They're knocking it out of the park. If that metric doesn't lead us towards the goal, if it's only a local optimization, it's waste. So don't even pursue it. Don't even put it on your dashboard. Throw that thing, delete it off your Power BI or your whiteboard or whatever it is.
Whatever. Yep.
Don't pursue it, creating excess inventory. And 2, don't even measure that. Just not even worth your time. So Jonah, he's such a sage.
Yes.
But he literally stops that group and puts them in place by only he's like, I understand these simple rules, and I'm trying to learn them. Trust me, I walk on your job site, I see inventory, I'm not going to be like, oh, we got issues here. But I always constantly are like, let's not try to chase down these Hollywood metrics that just look cool.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
I think here, I'm going to say something controversial. The Hollywood metrics of contractor, project teams, general contractors, trades of we finished on time and we finished on budget. Especially for GCs. I say it's a Hollywood metric for two reasons. One, big freaking deal. You were under contract to do that. Two, at what cost, right? Because general contractors, most of their staff are salaried. So they have no idea how many hours their people are working. And so how many of their people are on their second or third divorce or on the verge of their first? How many of their staff are self-medicating? How many of their staff are freaking miserable? But they're touting on schedule and on budget. That on schedule and on budget don't mean jack when your people are unhealthy and falling apart. So it's like I've asked this question several times, like why can't we track the number of hours people are working? Like I understand like it's not a time thing because they're salary, but you're celebrating something and you think you're winning, but you're not. You're killing your people.
Yeah, and we can very easily with smartphones.
So easy. And every time I brought that up, people look at me like, you're crazy, fool. I'm like, I mean, come on. Okay, maybe let's not track their hours. Let's look at how many ball games they didn't go to, how many vacations they rescheduled or canceled, how many rehearsals they didn't go to. Let's look at that. Nobody wants to look at that.
Those are harder to.
Yeah.
It's invisible. Almost invisible.
Yes.
Yeah. But
so big deal. On time and on schedule.
That weighs in. This week, the Lane Foundation's podcast.
Oh, yeah.
I was on it.
Listen to it. Yes.
And I actually talk about that.
Yep.
So I was saying I couldn't raise I thought I could be more productive and have more capacity by working more.
Nope. Right.
That's what I thought. And then I was working on a project. It was huge, city center, massive. Like it ran 24/7. And I wasn't rock star or anybody special out there at all. But I thought I could like grow my brand by just grinding, just grinding, just getting after it and getting into everything, all the stuff. And it was like, they were like, people were appreciative.
Yeah.
And I was promoted and given raises and all kinds of stuff. But what I told Walker and Davis was, I wasn't raising my capacity. I was taking out my energy for personal relationships.
Yep.
And whatever, like having a good home life, like all this stuff. I didn't burn that out. Like I had no hobbies. What did I do? I went to work, I went to bed, I went to the bar, and then went back to work. Maybe not in that order, but like those were the things.
That was it.
I own a home. My life was very work focused, and like I don't even look at pictures when I was very few. I mean, I'm hundreds or thousands of work photos in the album, but very few photos of like when I went to Bryce Canyon for a weekend or the Grand Canyon or Death Valley, like all these places that are around that area. So and that's a hard one because it's like you're also building your career that way. So, but I guess my thing was to them was like, yeah, you got to manage that and don't let your own ego take advantage of that. So become more effective. Don't just work harder. What I was trying to say, learn these techniques like in this book by Dr. Goldred. They are very sage advice. So let's do chapter 26. I think we wrap it here because it's this is genius, and this is why the home life it trickles in. And I'm like walking in, and he actually does it. He's having breakfast with his daughter and his son at the table, and he actually is honest with him. He's like, I got a problem.
Yeah.
I got a problem. We got two Herbies, and the kids know the Herbie story. He's like, we got two Herbies. But how do we keep the line from spreading? So he's like, okay, each of you, 10 minutes, go into the room and come with come up with an idea of how we're going to do with Herbie. So they do this. He's like, the winner gets a present or something. And his daughter comes back, Sharon, his daughter. He's like, okay, what's the solution? And Sharon goes, you need a drummer. It's like, like in a parade. He's like, yeah, she's like, I think I get it. Like, there's no gaps in a parade. Everybody's marching in step.
Yeah.
Dave goes, but how do you keep the people in front of Herbie from setting a faster pace? And Sharon, wise beyond her years,
yes,
you got to give Herbie the drum.
Oh,
awesome, right? Like, okay, who sets the pace? Herbie. Who sets the pace in front? Herbie. So even if Herbie's in the middle of the line, the signal, the drum,
yes,
that signal, that's the signal to go. Mr. Schroeder would call that tact, but I think that's a German word. But the drummer, so that way Herbie, even if he's not in front of the line, he signals the whole line how we keep together, and that's why it's so good. And children, they just know.
Yes.
Dave hits. This is like a 1-2 punch, and this gets. This is another book by Goldratt, but we'll do that another year. Yeah. The way we're going here, Dave goes, that's really good. I have a better idea. You use rope like climbers. You know how mountain climbers, I don't know if you've watched mountain climbers. They used to do this in ironworkers too. So you tie people together with rope. That way, if one person falls, the other person jumps the other way, and then you fall, right? So, but if you have a drum, people perhaps might, be like, that doesn't apply to me. Yeah, these rules, these are rules. They don't apply to me. I need my freedom. But if you had rope, no one can left behind because you physically can't. You're physically bound.
Yes.
So he's like, oh, come to think of it, the rope makes it sound like having physical links between all the equipment, which is like an assembly line. Dave's like, yeah, an assembly line. Didn't you tell me once that assembly line is supposed to be the best way to make things? He's like, well, that's the most of. He's like, oh, I'm Henry Ford now. The problem with the assembly line is it doesn't work through the whole plant. Like you can't literally.
Right.
We have too much variation. We're not just building Model Ts here. So he's sitting here doing corporate level problem solving with his two children who are like 8 and 10 years old. So to keep the line from spreading, you got to get everybody to march in the same step or tie them to rope. So Herbie's like signaling in front that the people in front of him. So it's like, we just tie the rope from Herbie to the kid at the front. So that everybody else along the middle,
stay in there.
They don't have to be tied together. They can have variation. What's important is the piece of rope from Herbie to the front.
Yep.
This is like, oh my God. What does that create, Mr. Schroeder?
Yep.
So if you have the drum, I got a rope from Herbie to the front of the line so that my inventory does not grow. I'm prevented from increasing inventory.
Yep.
It's impossible. I created a rule. They have the signals, but the people in the middle between Herbie and the person in the front, they all have buffers because they can fluctuate.
Yeah.
They can only fluctuate in between each other when they start running into each other. But they're all working on this drum, buffer, rope, drum, buffer, rope, drum, buffer, rope, drum, buffer, rope. This is the underlying production theory that is theory of constraints. And this is fictional, but it was figured out by a plant manager and his 2 children.
Yes.
So it's like, if we can hold material for red parts instead of pushing them back out as soon as the first bottleneck has nothing to do, the milling machines will then have time to work on the green parts, and the parts we're missing will reach assembly with no problem. We have a drum system that keeps everybody in place and check. That way we don't ever grow inventory. So if the drum don't beat, you don't take a step.
Stop.
If there's problems, we stop the line. And how do we stop the line? We got a rope from the bottleneck all the way to the front.
Yes.
That way we can stop the line if there's a complete constraint. But also there's variation. We also design in the variation in between the front of the line and Herbie. People can float. there's some float time. So that way
Yep.
you can choose to work on bottleneck, work on non-bottlenecks, but only when the beat is happening. This is the theory of constraints. It's a drum, everybody worked attack, buffer, design in fluctuation for statistical variation, and a rope having very specific rules about not overproducing.
Yes.
And then what metrics are we going to measure? We're going to measure inventory. We're going to measure operating expense.
Yep.
Right. And that's how we don't pursue any other Hollywood metrics. If that metric isn't allowing us to move towards our goal, it's waste. We stop doing it.
Yes. Yes.
So like Alex goes back and he tries to implement this in the factory, and he's like, "This is genius. Where did you come up with this?"
The kids.
He's like, "Well, I'm just such a," but I think that's really cool. But I think the thing that is important and the work-life balance thing, and for me is especially true, is you got to do that night thinking. You got to do the night thinking.
Yes.
Or what I mean by that is like you have to like introduce diverse sets of inputs into your train of thought, or else you get trapped in this mind. So if you're at a conference, like perhaps going to happen, the most important conversation is not the one that you listen to, it's the one that's out in the hallway.
Yeah.
The one after your like sixth IPA at Tootsie's if you're in Nashville. So it's like, don't just get tied up in your own traditional ways. Obviously, we want to attack these problems in very systematic ways, but also like when we're doing problem solving, we want to have diverse sets of inputs, including children in this case. My God! But then also, if they have a really good idea that makes systematic sense, implement it. Let's do it. Let's try it out. So
yes.
I want to leave it there because that is great. So we have now introduced all of these production rules. Don't let resources sit idle. If you have constraints, you have to focus on them, even if it makes you uncomfortable, even if it makes the person that you're going to talk about uncomfortable. And then when you approach that improvement, I'm kind of summarizing my rules here. When you approach that improvement, you only use data.
Yes.
Use data. So if there's any kind of assumption, that you got to go test it out. You got to be like, Jesse, you got to be, hey, do this. What was it, ductile iron connection in front of me, or a hubless? Do the hubless connection and show me how you do it. Don't just rely on assumptions, because the red Milwaukee Impact and the special one for that hubless device, they look almost the same.
Yep.
And then you got to set up your work ahead of the constraints.
Yep.
You gotta set up. So if I got to work, I'm going to relieve this constraint. The next phase. So that means your A team, you got to watch them too. You got to measure everybody.
Yes.
So don't always do the force ranking. In fact, if you have an A team and they're not willing to work on constraints, they're not the A team. They're cheaters.
Yes.
Drum, set up a signaling process. Signals are so important. Apparently there's a new one, smell.
Yeah.
But don't let signals only be written word or audible. It's got to linger. That's why smell. It's getting late. We're getting late. We're getting punchy here, but it's got to linger. That means like you have to be able to see it or sense it without somebody being there to tell you. And the same thing when that issue is resolved, the signal tells you. It's like a drum. And if you don't hear the drum, you don't take a step. So if you're creating inventory, don't overbuild it. You're creating waste. You're going to create errors. You're overproducing something, and that's the mother of all waste. Being early is bad.
Yes.
And then don't pursue an activity that doesn't lead you to the goal. And I'm going to leave it there. So if we're pursuing an activity that looks cool, or maybe it's, we're trying something new, but it's led by an initiative that's not leading us to the goal, we should challenge that. We should always challenge that. And also be like, if there's a traditional method or an old school way that we're going to go get the old World War II milling machines out.
Yep.
If that's the solution, then take action on it and go do it. So I'm going to leave it there, because that those gets us to chapter 27, but it's like You learn this method, you're convinced through a series of simulations. You go try, you do implements, you run experiments, you get wins. You understand that your wins are just like the tip of the iceberg, and you need that third party. You need a Jesse Hernandez to come in, because me as operational, I can only see the boundaries of our work, and you need that third party, because that third party will challenge your assumptions that you're blind to, just because that's just how human bias works.
Yeah.
It's so important. And at this point in the book, it's like, oh damn, we have a system. This system is so simple, it can be improved by 8 and 10-year-olds that have no concept, no MBAs, not even, what's a 10-year-old, like sixth grade.
Yeah.
So it's this very simple, almost universal process. If you trust it, it's like, it's magical. So
Trust the
you got to trust and got to work towards a goal. So yeah, that's for me. Once we started to try those types of things, and then the vanity metrics or the Hollywood metrics idea was like, I've been doing all this measuring stuff wrong. That was the moment when I stopped, or I changed the way I graded PPC. And I just went, and that the reason why the PPC is the reason why, when you had that discussion with Felipe on the collab session with his podcast, that's what drew me into your orbit and put me out here onto the what do you call it? The omniverse.
The omniverse, yes.
But that's incredibly important, because if I didn't read that and I said I need to start challenging some of my scheduling metrics, and we started challenging that kind of stuff, and we made decisions, and these decisions were based upon data instead of assumptions, and we were better for it. So I thought it was incredibly important. I want to share that, and that's all I got. What about you?
I think the key thing, I'm going to hit it again, because I want people to this whole mental wellness and suicide epidemic that we're dealing with in our industry. I think this is a big contributing factor, especially at the GC level. And that stress just trickles all the way through to the trades that are doing the work. Finishing on time and on budget ain't good enough. Our people need to be healthy. Our people need to be growing. Our people need to be experiencing an enhanced quality of life on site and off site. Mm-hmm. And so these you ain't accomplished nothing. And if all you're doing is finishing on time and on schedule, and have no idea that your teams are working 80, 90 hours a week. Yes. You might have some sophisticated budget tracking mechanism, but you know what? Budgets aren't hard. That's easy. You may have some sophisticated planning stuff. And guess what? The sun tracks time for us. You ain't accomplished much. The hard stuff, the quality of life stuff, the mental wellness of our people stuff, all that talent you got on putting together your Power BI dashboards, apply some of that to measuring the quality of life your people are experiencing. That's it.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you.
Yeah, man. All right. I was in the recording.
That was the best one.
Oh my goodness. You're either driving down the road or just so enthralled with this whole podcast that you went all the way down to the very, 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 very end of it. And we appreciate you. And we're going to take this as an indication of your dedication. So we got a little special request of you, a call to action, because everybody tells us that you need to have a call to action. So here's the call to action. Be kind to yourself. Go out there and share a smile with someone. Peace.